I walked up the familiar steps of the luxury high-rise that was supposed to be my home, my Italian leather shoes tapping against the polished marble of the lobby. The elevator whisked me up to the penthouse, 42 floors above San Francisco, where the fog was just beginning to roll in across the bay. This place had belonged to Vanessa's family for years, passed down like some precious heirloom when we got married 3 years ago. When Vanessa and I got married, I thought it was ours, a place where we'd build our future together. I was wrong about that, and it hit me harder every day. 6 months ago, everything changed. Diana and Zoe moved in after Diana's divorce and Zoe's startup flamed out. I didn't fight it, family's family, right? But ever since they showed up, I'd been feeling less like a husband and more like an employee. Someone who provided the technical genius but didn't belong at the strategy table. I'm a software engineer, not just any coder, but the architect behind Prism, the AI platform that had turned our startup into the darling of Silicon Valley. It's my code running everything, my innovation that attracted 20 million in Series B funding last quarter. But when I come home, it's like I'm stepping into someone else's world. Diana's got her sharp tongue, always reminding me I didn't go to Stanford, didn't grow up with their connections. Zoe treats me like I'm invisible unless she needs technical support for her latest social media campaign. And Vanessa, she just lets it happen, smiling like nothing's wrong while I fade into the background. Tonight was Diana's birthday, and I'd spent my lunch break getting ready for it. I picked out an expensive bottle of champagne, and a gift I thought she'd like, a custom-designed smartwatch with a diamond-studded band. I even left work early to help set up. It wasn't easy after being up since 5 a.m. coding, but I wanted to show I cared, that I was part of this family. Vanessa had been buzzing around all day, excited about the party, and I thought maybe tonight would be different. Maybe they'd see me as more than just the guy who wrote the code that made them rich. I should have known better. As I stood there in the elevator, hand hovering over the biometric scanner, I felt a knot in my stomach. Something was off. Tonight wasn't going to be about celebration, it was going to be the night I finally saw the truth, the night I'd realized just how little I mattered in this glass house that was once mine. The penthouse was alive with soft jazz and the murmur of conversation. I set the champagne and the gift on the console table, straightening my tie in the mirror above it. Voices drifted in from the living room, Diana's commanding laugh, Zoe's high-pitched chatter, the respectful murmurs of people who wanted something from them. I stood by Vanessa's side as the guests started trickling in. The living room was buzzing with the tech elite VCs and casual button-downs that cost more than my first car, startup founders with their practiced elevator pitches, industry journalists looking for the next big scoop. Then Marcus walked in, our chief product officer, brilliant at translating my technical innovations into features people would pay for. The room lit up when he arrived. Diana rushed over to hug him, Zoe practically squealed, and even Vanessa's face softened in a way it hadn't for me all night. I stood there, hands in my pockets, watching them fawn over him. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. I didn't need their hugs or their praise, but seeing how they welcomed him, how they treated him like he belonged, stung in a way I couldn't shake. Dinner was about to start, and I followed the crowd toward the dining area. I was hungry, tired from the day, and ready to sit down and eat. But as we filed in, something shifted in the air. The chatter died down, and I felt eyes on me, not friendly ones. I walked into the dining room, the smell of gourmet food hitting me as I crossed the threshold. Everyone was moving toward their spots, Diana at the head, Zoe plopping down next to her, Marcus easing into a chair. Vanessa was still arranging something on the sideboard, her back to me. I took a step forward, ready to sit down and eat after a 14-hour workday, when I noticed something immediately. The seats were wrong. I stopped dead, my eyes scanning the table. There were 11 chairs, 11 place settings, 11 crystal water glasses, but there were 12 of us in the room. My seat was missing. The chatter around the table didn't stop. No one seemed to notice I was still standing. Then Vanessa turned around, carrying a platter of something that smelled incredible, and caught my eye. "Oh," she said, her voice light and sweet, like she was surprised. "Isn't there the right number of seats?" She smiled as she said it, but there was something in her eyes, amusement, maybe, or something colder. Before I could answer, a ripple of laughter spread around the table. Diana smirked, her wine glass halfway to her lips. Zoe didn't even try to hide it, she giggled, loud and sharp, covering her mouth with her hand like a kid who'd pulled a prank. Even Marcus, who I thought was decent, let out a quiet chuckle. My stomach twisted hard. This wasn't an accident. They'd planned it, set up the table to leave me out, to make me the butt of their little joke. I guess I'm not part of the company, I said, my voice low but steady. It wasn't loud, wasn't a yell, but it cut through the room like a knife. No one said anything back. Diana's smirk slipped a little, and Zoe's eyes widened, but Vanessa just stared at me, her smile gone. I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked away, my footsteps heavy on the floor, heading for my home office. The dining room went quiet behind me, the clatter of plates and voices gone. I entered my office and closed the door behind me. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt clear, like a fog had lifted and I could finally see what was right in front of me. My office was the one space in the penthouse that was truly mine: 3 monitors, a custom-built PC, and walls covered in whiteboards filled with code snippets and system architecture diagrams. This was where I'd built Prism from nothing, line by line, algorithm by algorithm. I pulled up our company's code repository, my fingers flying over the keyboard. For months, they'd been pushing me out, little by little. Diana with her comments about how I just didn't understand the business side, Zoe with her endless demands for technical fixes for her social campaigns, Vanessa with her silence when I needed her to stand up for me. And now this: no seat at the table, no place for me. I started digging through the commit logs, looking at recent changes to our codebase. Something had felt off for weeks: small changes I hadn't authorized, meetings I wasn't invited to. Now I was going to find out what they were hiding. I stopped scrolling when I saw a massive commit from 3 days ago, when I'd been at that conference in Seattle. The changes were extensive, touching core parts of our architecture, and they weren't made by me. My heart pounded as I looked closer. They were preparing to migrate our entire platform, my platform, to a new infrastructure, one I hadn't designed or approved. I grabbed my phone and called Nathan, my brother, my rock. He was a cybersecurity expert now, running his own consulting firm. "Hey," Nathan's voice came through, calm and steady. "What's up?" "I need you here, now, it's bad." He didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. "On my way," he said, and the line went dead. 20 minutes later, Nathan arrived. He was in jeans and a black hoodie, his work uniform, with his laptop bag slung over his shoulder. "So what's the emergency?" he asked as soon as the office door closed behind us. "I think they're stealing my company," I said, the words sounding strange as I said them out loud for the first time. Vanessa, Diana, Zoe, all of them. Nathan didn't look surprised. He just nodded, dropped his bag on the floor, and pulled out his laptop. "Show me what you've got." I turned my monitors toward him and walked him through what I'd found: the unauthorized code changes, the infrastructure migration, the meetings I hadn't been invited to. "That's not all," I said, pulling up another screen. "Look at this." It was an email thread I'd found, forwarded to a hidden folder in our shared drive. Vanessa, Diana, and the board members, discussing a potential acquisition offer from Vertex, our biggest competitor. I showed him the term sheet I'd found, buried in another folder. The deal was structured to push me out completely. My shares would be diluted to nothing, my role eliminated in the restructuring. Meanwhile, Vanessa would become chief marketing officer at Vertex, Diana would join their board, and Zoe would lead their social media strategy. They'd get millions. I'd get nothing. For the next hour, we dug deeper, Nathan using tools I'd never seen to access hidden files, deleted emails, and private Slack channels. What we found made my blood run cold. They'd been planning this for months: secret meetings with Vertex, technical evaluations of my code, plans to replicate my work once I was pushed out. They'd even discussed how to handle the Ethan situation, as Diana had so coldly put it in one email. "We need to be careful," she'd written. "He's the face of the technical side. We need to transition him out slowly, make it look like his choice." Vanessa had replied, "Don't worry, he trusts me. He won't see it coming." I stared at those words, my wife's words, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. All this time, while I was working myself to exhaustion building our platform, she'd been plotting to cut me out. "We've got everything we need," Nathan said finally. "They're not just planning to sell the company, they've already started the process. The contracts are drafted. They're just waiting for the right moment to push you out." Nathan's smile was cold, determined. "We go downstairs and show them exactly who they're dealing with." We walked down the stairs together, my footsteps steady now. The conversation in the dining room died instantly when we appeared in the doorway. Vanessa was mid-sentence, her wine glass in the air, when she saw us and froze. Nathan didn't sit down. He just set his laptop on the edge of the table with a soft thud, the sound cutting through the quiet like a gunshot. Every eye was on him now, and I stood behind him, arms crossed, letting him take the lead. "Evening, everyone," he said, his voice smooth but hard, like steel wrapped in velvet. "Let's talk." He opened his laptop, his fingers quick and sure, and pulled up the first email. "This," he said, turning the screen so they could see, "is why I'm here." Vanessa's hands gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. Nathan's eyes flicked to her, then to Diana, then Zoe, like he was sizing them up. "You've been busy," he said, and his tone made it clear he wasn't here to play nice. He dropped the bombshell then. "Vanessa is selling Prism to Vertex, and she didn't tell you." He looked at me when he said that last part, playing it up for the guests who didn't know this was all for show. I stared at her, waiting for her to deny it, but she didn't. She just sat there, white as a sheet, and I knew right then that every terrible thing we'd discovered was true. "Let's make this quick," Nathan said, turning the screen to show a contract draft with Vertex's logo prominently displayed at the top. "This is an acquisition agreement, drafted 3 weeks ago." He tapped a section of the document, highlighted in yellow. "The interesting part is here: the management transition plan. Vanessa becomes CMO at Vertex. Diana joins their board with a compensation package worth $2 million annually. Zoe gets to head their new digital engagement division." He looked up, his eyes cold. "Notice anyone missing from that list?" Marcus leaned forward, his forehead creased in genuine confusion. "What is this?" he asked, his voice sharp. Nathan didn't miss a beat. "This," he said, pointing to another highlighted section, "is evidence of corporate fraud. The deal's been in motion for months. And here's the kicker: it explicitly excludes the chief technology officer and co-founder from any meaningful role post-acquisition." Nathan kept going, pulling up more files, emails, Slack messages, meeting notes, stuff I hadn't even seen during our investigation. "The property's in Ethan's name, technically speaking," he said, looking at the guests now. "The core algorithms, the architecture, it's all his intellectual property, under the terms of your operating agreement. He needs to approve any sale." "She didn't get it," he continued, his voice hard. "Didn't even ask. Just started selling off his life's work behind his back." He paused, letting that sink in, then pointed at Zoe and Diana. "Oh, and it gets better. The money's already flowing. $500,000 in consulting fees paid to Diana last quarter for strategic advice. Another $300,000 to Zoe's shell company for brand development. All while you're planning to leave Ethan with nothing." Marcus's face went red, his jaw tight. "Vanessa, is this true?" he asked, but she didn't answer. Diana jumped in instead, her voice sharp. "Now, wait just a minute. This is business, not some family drama. We're doing what's best for the company." Nathan cut her off with a look, cold and hard. "Funny you say that, Diana, because you're in on it too." He pulled up another document, the full term sheet for the Vertex acquisition, with Diana's comments in the margins about how to handle the Ethan situation. I took a step forward, my voice low but clear. "You are going to sell my company, my code, my algorithms, my life's work behind my back." Vanessa finally looked up at me, her eyes wide, but she didn't say a word. That silence said everything. She'd done it all, every bit of it, and she thought I'd never find out. Marcus stood up, shoving his chair back. "I'm out," he said, his voice tight with anger. "You're on your own with this." He walked past me, pausing just long enough to put his hand on my shoulder. "Call me tomorrow. We need to talk." Then he was gone, the elevator doors closing behind him with a soft chime. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, opening the email I drafted earlier that day. I stepped forward and set my phone on the table in front of Vanessa, the screen showing the email addressed to our board of directors. "This is done," I said, my voice steady, almost too calm. "I've documented everything: the fraud, the theft, the conspiracy. I'm calling for an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. You're finished." She looked up at me, her eyes red, her mouth opening like she wanted to argue. "Ethan, please," she whispered, barely loud enough to hear. I smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was cold, final. "I already did," I said, tapping the phone screen where the sent confirmation was visible. "It's over." Diana jumped up then, her chair scraping hard against the floor. "You can't do this," she yelled, her voice cracking. "This is her company, her vision. You're just the tech guy." Nathan stepped in before I could answer, his tone sharp. "Actually, he can," he said, pulling out another document from his laptop bag. "The operating agreement is clear. Any executive found misappropriating company funds or engaging in self-dealing can be removed by board vote. Given what we've shown them tonight, how do you think that vote's going to go?" Vanessa picked up my phone, her hands trembling as she read the email I'd sent. "Please," she said, her voice small, looking at me like I might change my mind. "We can talk about this. I didn't mean." I cut her off. "You didn't mean to sell our company, to steal from the RD budget, to laugh in my face with your family?" I shook my head, stepping back. "You meant every bit of it. You just didn't think I'd fight back." She started crying then, quiet tears rolling down her cheeks, but it didn't touch me. I'd spent years trying to make her happy, trying to fit into her family's vision, and all I got was a missing chair and a knife in my back. I was done begging for a place at their table. 6 months can change everything. I sat in my new workspace, a converted industrial loft in Oakland with exposed brick walls and massive windows that let in the afternoon sunlight. Around me, a dozen engineers worked quietly at their stations, the soft click of keyboards and occasional murmur of conversation, the only sounds breaking the productive silence. This wasn't Prism anymore. This was Foundry, my new company, built from the ground up with people I trusted, code I believed in, and principles that wouldn't bend. The aftermath of that night had been both simpler and more complicated than I'd expected. The board meeting the next morning had been brief and decisive. With the evidence Nathan and I presented, they had no choice but to remove Vanessa as CEO. Diana's consulting contracts were terminated, and Zoe's role eliminated entirely. The Vertex deal collapsed within days, their legal team backing away as soon as the extent of the fraud became clear. No one wanted to touch a company embroiled in that kind of scandal, especially when the technical genius behind the product was leading the charge against the acquisition. I could have stayed at Prism. The board offered me the CEO position, practically begged me to take it. But the glass walls of that office held too many ghosts, too many betrayals. I didn't want to rebuild on a foundation that had already cracked once. So I walked away, taking only what was legally mine: my original code, my patents, and a settlement that acknowledged my contributions without bankrupting the company. It was enough to start fresh, to build something new. Nathan joined me immediately, bringing his cybersecurity expertise to the founding team. Marcus came aboard a month later, after tying up loose ends at Prism. We rented this space, hired a small team of brilliant engineers who cared more about the work than the hype, and got to work. No fancy offices, no glass penthouses, no pretense, just good code and honest work. My phone buzzed on the desk, pulling me from my thoughts. A text from Nathan: "Heads up. Zoe spotted at Blue Bottle on Broadway. Might want to avoid for lunch." I smiled slightly, appreciating the warning but not feeling the dread I might have expected. I'd heard through industry channels what had happened to them all after the implosion. Vanessa had tried to salvage her reputation, giving interviews claiming she'd been misunderstood, that the acquisition had been in the exploratory phase only. No one bought it. Last I heard, she'd moved to Los Angeles, trying to break into tech investing with whatever remained of her reputation and bank account. Diana had it worse. The board's investigation uncovered years of similar schemes at other companies: inflated consulting contracts, kickbacks, conflicts of interest she'd never disclosed. She was facing civil charges now, her carefully cultivated image as a tech pioneer in tatters. Zoe had drifted, her influencer dreams collapsing when the money dried up. She tried to rebrand herself as a tech whistleblower, of all things, but her inconsistent story made it impossible to take seriously. "Ethan." A voice pulled me from my thoughts. It was Layla, our lead data scientist, standing at my desk with a tablet in hand. "Got a minute? I think we've solved that scaling issue with the recommendation engine." I smiled, genuinely this time. "Always. Show me what you've got." This was what mattered now: the work, the problems we were solving, the team we were building, not the betrayals of the past. Later that evening, I found myself walking toward the financial district, where the glass towers of tech companies reached toward the sky. I stopped at a corner, looking up at a familiar building, the one that had housed Prism, the one where Vanessa and I had built our company and our life together. I didn't feel anger anymore when I looked at that building, just a distant sort of sadness for what might have been. Vanessa and I could have built something amazing together if she'd seen me as a true partner, not just a technical resource to be used and discarded. "Ethan?" The voice startled me, and I turned to find Marcus standing a few feet away, briefcase in hand, clearly just leaving the office himself. "Prism's moving out next month," he said, nodding toward the building I'd been staring at. "Downsizing to a smaller space in Soma." "You ever regret it?" Marcus asked after a moment, walking away. I considered the question, watching the lights in the building flicker as someone turned off an office for the night. "No," I said finally. "Not walking away. I regret not seeing it sooner, maybe. not understanding what was happening right in front of me. But leaving was the right call. We met Nathan at a bar nearby. He was already there when we arrived, holding a table in the back, his laptop open in front of him. "About time," he said as we sat down, but he was smiling. "What's this news you couldn't share over text?" Nathan's smile widened as he turned his laptop toward us. On the screen was an article from TechCrunch, the headline bold and clear: Vertex CEO steps down amid investigation into acquisition practices. I scanned the article quickly. Apparently our situation wasn't unique. Vertex had been engaging in similar tactics with other startups, using inside connections to undervalue companies before acquiring them. Someone had blown the whistle, and now the SEC was involved. "Karma's a fascinating system," Nathan said, closing the laptop. "Especially in tech." I couldn't help but laugh. "You didn't have anything to do with this, did you?" He held up his hands, the picture of innocence. "Me? I'm just a cybersecurity consultant. I just happen to know people who know people." We fell into easy conversation then, discussing the series of funding, the new features we were developing, the engineers we needed to hire. Normal business talk, the kind that happened in bars across San Francisco every night. "You know what I realized today?" Marcus said later, leaning back in his chair. "It's been exactly 6 months since that night at the penthouse. Half a year." "To 6 months," Marcus said, raising his glass, "and to whatever comes next." We clinked glasses, the sound bright in the quiet bar. Whatever comes next. I liked the sound of that, the openness of it, the possibility. The next morning, I was at the office early, as usual. My phone buzzed with a notification and email from an address I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something made me open it. "Ethan," it began. "I don't expect you to respond to this. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Not for getting caught, but for what I did. You deserved better. I hope you're building something amazing. I always knew you could. V." I stared at the message for a long moment, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. There was no request for forgiveness, no plea to reconnect, just an acknowledgement of wrong and a wish for my success. It was, perhaps, the most honest thing Vanessa had ever said to me. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say, really. But as I set my phone down and turned to my computer, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I was missing. The office began to fill up around me, engineers arriving with their coffees and headphones, settling in for the day's work. This was my home now, not a glass house built on someone else's foundation, but a space I'd created, filled with people who valued what I brought to the table. It wasn't perfect, wasn't finished, but it was real. And it was mine. I opened my code editor and began to type, each keystroke building something new, one line at a time.